I found out I was cut out of the will on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. The kind of rain that soaked through your shoes and made everything feel heavier than it already was. My older brother read the will out loud, slow and confident, like he had practiced it. My sister sat beside him, nodding, already smiling. I stood near the back of the room, empty-handed. When the lawyer finished reading, there was a pause. No one looked at me. That silence told me everything. The house, the savings, the land, none of it had my name on it. My family acted like I wasn't even there. My brother finally spoke. He said, "I guess that's that." My sister added, "Dad probably thought you didn't need it." I wanted to ask what that meant, but my throat felt tight. I just nodded and left. Outside, the rain hit my face like cold needles. I sat in my car for a long time, staring at the steering wheel. I wasn't angry yet. I was numb. They thought I was broke. They thought I had nothing. And at that moment, I let them believe it. Growing up, I was always the quiet one. Not the favorite. Not the problem child either. Just invisible. My parents praised my siblings for every small win. I learned early that silence kept the peace. When I turned 18, I moved out without a goodbye party. I worked 2 jobs while putting myself through school. I never asked my family for help. Not once. They took that as weakness. Years later, when my father got sick, I visited every weekend. I drove him to appointments. I paid for medications when insurance didn't cover them. My siblings came when it was convenient. They took photos. They posted online. When Dad passed, everyone praised my brother for handling things. No one mentioned the nights I slept on a chair beside Dad's bed. At the will reading, the lawyer kept glancing at me. I noticed it, but I didn't understand why. When everyone left, he cleared his throat and said, "Please wait. I may need to speak with you later." Later. That word stayed with me. I drove home that night feeling small, but something didn't add up. My father was many things, but careless wasn't one of them. 2 days passed without a call. I went back to work, pretending everything was normal. I stocked shelves, smiled at customers, and ignored the messages from my siblings planning how to divide the house. On the 3rd day, my phone rang. Unknown number. The lawyer's voice was calm but firm. He asked me to come to his office alone. He stressed that word. Alone. When I arrived, the office felt different than before. The lights were dimmer. The door closed behind me with a click that echoed too loudly. He didn't sit right away. He walked to a cabinet, unlocked it, and pulled out a thick envelope. My name was written across it in my father's handwriting. The lawyer said this was not part of the public reading. He paused. "Your father instructed me to give this to you only after everything else was finalized." My hands shook as I held the envelope. I asked why. He looked me straight in the eyes and said, "Because your father knew exactly how your family would behave." Inside the envelope were documents. Legal documents. I didn't understand everything at first, but the lawyer explained slowly. Years ago, my father had created a separate trust. My name was the only one listed. The house my siblings were already arguing over, it wasn't fully theirs. The land attached to it had been transferred quietly into the trust, so had several accounts I never knew existed. My father had planned this carefully. He knew my siblings would fight. He knew they would push me aside, so he protected me in silence. The lawyer said, "If this goes to court, they'll lose." He leaned back and folded his hands. "But they don't know yet." I asked what I should do. He smiled slightly and said, "That depends on how loud you want this to get." I left the office feeling something I hadn't felt in years. Control. That night, my brother texted me, asking if I could help clean out Dad's garage. I replied, "Sure." I wasn't ready to speak yet. I was ready to watch. Over the next week, my family showed their true colors. My sister complained about money nonstop. My brother talked about selling the house quickly. They both acted like the future was already theirs. I helped them. I lifted boxes. I smiled. I listened. They joked about how easy things were now. One night, my brother said, "At least there's one less person to split things with." He laughed. I laughed too. Inside, I was counting days. The lawyer called again. Everything was signed. Everything was legal. All that remained was timing. I thought about my father, about how he trusted me to stay quiet until it mattered. I realized this wasn't about revenge. It was about truth. The next family meeting was scheduled for Friday. They planned to finalize the sale. I showed up early. I sat at the table. I waited. This time, when the door closed, I wasn't the one being shut out. Friday came faster than I expected. My brother arrived first, confident and loud, already talking about real estate agents. My sister followed, carrying a folder she barely understood. They spoke over each other, barely noticing me. When everyone settled, my brother cleared his throat and said, "Let's make this quick. We've already agreed on the sale." He slid papers across the table toward my sister. I waited. The lawyer arrived last. He nodded to everyone, then sat beside me instead of at the head of the table. That small detail changed the air in the room. My brother frowned. "What's this meeting about?" "We already heard the will." The lawyer opened his briefcase and said, "This meeting is about what was not read." Silence dropped hard. My sister shifted in her chair. The lawyer continued, calm and steady. "Your father left additional instructions. Instructions that take effect now." My brother laughed nervously. "There's nothing else." The lawyer looked at him and said, "Actually, there is." I felt my heart pound, but I kept my face still. Years of being ignored had trained me well. The lawyer placed copies of the trust documents on the table. My brother skimmed the first page, then froze. My sister leaned over his shoulder, her smile fading fast. "This can't be real," my brother said. His voice cracked. "Why wasn't this read before?" The lawyer replied, "Because your father requested privacy, and because this trust overrides parts of the will." My sister turned to me. "You knew about this?" Her eyes were sharp, accusing. I shook my head slowly. "I found out when the lawyer called me back. Alone." That word hit them harder than I expected. My brother stood up, pacing. "This isn't fair. You don't even need the money." I finally spoke. "You don't know what I need. You never asked." The room felt smaller. My sister's hands trembled as she read my name again and again on the papers. The lawyer said, "The land and accounts belong to the trust. Any sale requires his approval." He pointed at me. For the first time in my life, my family waited for my answer. They didn't yell right away. First came denial, then bargaining. My brother offered to split things differently. My sister said Dad must have been confused. They talked fast, desperate, like words alone could undo ink and signatures. I stayed quiet. I watched their faces change as reality sank in. Finally, my brother snapped. "You planned this." I looked at him and said, "No, Dad did." That shut him up. The lawyer stood and said, "You have two options. Work together under the trust terms or challenge it in court." My sister whispered, "What happens if we challenge it?" The lawyer didn't hesitate. "You lose." After he left, my siblings turned on me fully. Accusations flew. Old memories were twisted. They brought up every mistake I'd ever made. I listened, then I stood. "I didn't take anything from you," I said. "You just never noticed what Dad gave me." I walked out before they could respond. The days after were quiet. Too quiet. No calls. No messages. I knew they were planning something. A week later, I got served papers. They were contesting the trust. I wasn't surprised. The lawyer wasn't either. Court took months. My siblings looked smaller each time I saw them. Angry, tired, scared. Their lawyers argued emotion. Mine argued facts. My father's notes were read aloud. Letters he had written years ago, explaining why he chose silence over conflict, why he trusted me. When the judge ruled, it was quick. The trust stood, every word of it. Outside the courtroom, my sister cried. My brother wouldn't look at me. I felt relief, but also sadness. This wasn't how I wanted things to end. But endings don't ask permission. That night, I sat alone in the house they thought was theirs. I walked through rooms filled with memories. I finally understood my father's choice. Sometimes, the quiet one sees everything. Months passed. The house stayed. I didn't sell it. I fixed it. Slowly. Carefully. My siblings moved on without me. Or maybe they stayed angry. I didn't check. I used part of the trust to start something small. A business my father once talked about but never had time to build. It grew. Not fast, but steady. Like him, people from my family reached out eventually. Cousins. Old friends. They said things like, "I heard what happened." I kept my answers short. One evening, I found another envelope in the house, hidden behind a drawer. Inside was a note from my father. It said, "If you're reading this, you stayed patient. I'm proud of you." I folded the note and put it in my pocket. They thought I was broke. They thought silence meant weakness. But the truth was already signed. And for once, I didn't have to say a word. Winning in court didn't end the tension. It sharpened it. Word spread to the family fast. But not the truth. Only rumors. Some said I manipulated Dad. Others said I found a loophole. No one said he planned it himself. I stayed away from gatherings. I focused on the house and the business. Every morning, I woke up early and worked until my hands ached. The quiet helped me think. One afternoon, an older aunt visited. She walked through the house slowly, touching the walls. Then she looked at me and said, "Your father trusted you more than anyone." That sentence stayed with me. Later that week, I found a locked metal box in the garage. Inside were old documents, photos, and a small notebook. It was my father's handwriting again. He had written about watching the family drift apart, about noticing who showed up when no one was watching, about choosing patience over noise. Reading those pages felt like hearing his voice again. He knew this would hurt, but he believed honesty would last longer than anger. That night, I realized something important. This wasn't just about money or property. It was about being seen. Finally, clearly, and without doubt, the business grew slowly, just as I wanted. I hired local workers, paid fair wages, and kept things simple. People noticed. Trust builds faster than profit. One evening, my brother showed up unannounced. He looked thinner, tired. He stood on the porch like he wasn't sure he belonged there. "I just want to talk," he said. I let him in. He didn't apologize right away. He talked about stress, bills, and how things got out of hand. I listened without interrupting. Finally, he asked, "Do you think Dad really meant to do this?" I answered honestly, "Yes." He thought about it for years. Silence filled the room. "I wish we had noticed you more," he said quietly. That hurt more than anger ever did. When he left, nothing was fixed. But something shifted. The past didn't change, yet it felt lighter. I understood then that closure doesn't always come with forgiveness. Sometimes it comes with truth spoken too late, but spoken anyway. My sister didn't come on her own. Instead, she sent a message asking to meet in public. We sat across from each other at a small cafe. She kept her arms crossed. Defensive. "You didn't have to embarrass us," she said. "I didn't," I replied. "You did that yourselves." Her eyes softened for a moment. "We really thought you had nothing." I nodded. "That was easier for you." She looked down at her cup. "Dad always talked about responsibility." I guess I didn't listen. Neither of us smiled. We talked for an hour. Not about money. About childhood. About missed signs. About how silence can look like distance when it's really patience. When we stood to leave, she said, "I don't know if I can forgive this." I answered, "You don't have to. Neither do I." Walking away, I felt strangely calm. Not happy. Not sad. Just steady. Some bridges don't burn. They fade. And sometimes that's enough. A year passed. The house felt fully mine now. Not because of papers, but because of peace. I repainted walls, fixed the roof, and planted trees in the yard. The business supported me well. I lived simply. I slept better. One evening, I hosted a small dinner. A few coworkers, a neighbor. Laughter filled the room. Real laughter. Later, I sat alone on the porch, watching the sun go down. I thought about how loudly everything once felt. The arguments, the courtrooms, the whispers. Now, it was quiet again, but different. I realized my father didn't want revenge. He wanted balance. He wanted effort to matter more than entitlement. I never told my family how much the trust was worth. I never corrected their assumptions. Some still thought I got lucky. That was fine. I had learned that the loudest victories don't need witnesses. They only need truth. On the anniversary of my father's passing, I visited his grave alone. I brought no flowers, just time. I told him everything. About the court, about the business, about my siblings, about the nights I doubted myself. I stayed quiet. I said out loud, just like you taught me. The wind moved through the trees. I imagined he was listening. Before leaving, I placed his notebook back in my bag. I kept it close, not as proof, but as a reminder. Driving home, I felt complete in a way I never had before. They had written me out of the will. They had judged my silence. But in the end, the truth didn't need defending. It waited, and when the door finally closed, it opened exactly where it was meant to. Life settled into a routine that felt earned. I woke early, worked through the day, and returned to a house that finally felt calm. No tension hung in the air. No voices argued in my head. Then a letter arrived. It was from a distant relative I barely remembered. Inside were copies of messages my siblings had sent, asking for support, money, or statements to use against me. Every request had been refused. Reading those pages, I realized how close everything had come to turning uglier. The silence I kept wasn't weakness. It was protection. That night, I reviewed the trust documents again. Everything was solid. My father had even planned for situations I never considered. He knew people panic when control slips away. The lawyer called the next day, just to check in. He said challenges had stopped. They finally understand, he told me. I thanked him and hung up. For the first time since the reading of the will, I felt free of looking over my shoulder. What surprised me most wasn't winning. It was how little winning mattered once the noise faded. Peace was louder than any argument they had thrown at me. Months later, I was invited to a family gathering. A neutral one. No holidays. No announcements. Just dinner. I hesitated before going. Then I decided hiding no longer served me. When I arrived, conversations paused briefly, then resumed. No one made a scene. That alone felt like progress. My siblings were there, quieter than before. Older, somehow. During dinner, someone mentioned my father. Not his estate, not the will, just him. Stories followed. Laughter, real this time. I spoke once. I said he believed effort mattered. No one argued. After dinner, my sister walked me to my car. She said, "We judged you by what we could see." I answered, "Most people do." She nodded slowly. I won't forget that. Driving home, I felt something close to forgiveness. Not given, not asked for, just forming naturally. Sometimes, understanding arrives after damage is done. It doesn't fix everything, but it softens the edges. The business reached a turning point. I was offered a partnership that would expand everything quickly. Bigger money, bigger risks. I thought of my father again, of patience. I declined. Instead, I invested in people who believed in me early. Growth stayed steady. Honest. One afternoon, a young worker asked how I started with so little. I smiled and said, I stayed quiet and paid attention. He laughed, thinking it was a joke. It wasn't. That evening, I walked through the house one last time before renovating the back rooms. I paused at the spot where my siblings once argued loudly. The echo was gone. I realized something important. The story wasn't about inheritance anymore. It was about identity. They had tried to define me by what I didn't have. My father defined me by what I gave. That difference changed everything. Another year passed. The past no longer followed me into sleep. When I thought of my siblings, it was without anger. One morning, my brother called. His voice was different, humble. I just wanted to say you handled everything better than we did, he said. I thanked him. That was enough. After the call, I opened my father's notebook again. The last page caught my eye. It read, "Truth doesn't rush. It waits until people are ready to hear it. I closed the book carefully. The trust had given me stability, but the lesson gave me strength. I didn't need recognition anymore. I didn't need apologies. I had built something honest out of silence. That felt like the real inheritance. On a quiet evening, I sat on the porch, watching the lights turn on across the neighborhood. Ordinary lives. Ordinary moments. I thought back to that rainy Tuesday, to the numbness, to being ignored. If I could speak to that version of myself, I wouldn't warn him. I wouldn't rush him. I'd tell him to stay patient. Because the truth doesn't need shouting. It needs timing. They thought I was broke. They thought I was invisible. But the truth was written long before they noticed. And when it finally spoke, it spoke clearly. The last step of the trust came quietly. No meetings. No courtroom. Just paperwork finalized on a calm morning. The lawyer called confirm everything was complete. "You're fully protected now," he said. I thanked him and ended the call. I sat for a long time afterward, thinking about how strange it felt. Something that once caused so much tension now ended with a simple sentence. Later that day, I walked through the land behind the house. The sun was low, and the grass moved slowly in the wind. This land had been part of my father's plan from the start. He wanted it cared for, not sold quickly. I decided to keep it that way. I marked off space for future projects. A workshop, storage, maybe something more someday. There was no rush. For the first time, I wasn't reacting to anyone else's pressure. Every choice was mine. Silence didn't feel heavy anymore. It felt earned. People slowly stopped asking about the will. Time dulled the curiosity. New stories replaced the old ones. At work, I was no longer the quiet one. I was just dependable. That mattered more. One afternoon, I received a letter from a former neighbor of my father. Inside was a short note. It read, "Your dad always said you'd understand when the time was right." I folded it carefully. That night, I cooked dinner and ate alone at the table where arguments once echoed. I realized I didn't feel lonely. Peace had filled the space anger left behind. I thought about how easily things could have gone differently if I had spoken too soon, if I had reacted instead of waited. The loudest moments often lead to regret. The quiet ones lead to clarity. My father knew that. Another family gathering came and went. This time, no tension followed me home. Just memories. My sister spoke kindly. My brother listened more than he talked. None of us mentioned the past directly. We didn't need to. Afterward, I drove home under a dark sky filled with stars. I remember being young, wondering if anyone noticed me. They hadn't, but my father did. That realization stayed with me. Not as pride, as grounding. The inheritance didn't define me. The trust didn't complete me. Understanding did. I started mentoring younger workers, not with speeches, with patience. I taught them that silence isn't weakness, that attention matters, that effort speaks louder than noise. Some listened, some didn't. That was okay. One evening, I locked at the workshop and stood still for a moment. The air smelled like wood and oil. Honest work. I smiled. Life didn't explode into something dramatic. It grew steady and strong. That felt better. Years later, people still asked how I managed everything so calmly. I always gave the same answer. I waited, because the truth doesn't fight. It doesn't chase approval. It waits until the door closes. Then it opens the right one. They thought I was broke. They thought I was invisible. But the truth was already signed. And when it finally spoke, it didn't need to shout.